Welcome to the Three Questions webcast series. I'm Wayne Baxter, Executive Director with One Capital Management. At One Capital Management, we develop and implement strategies for our clients which strive to grow, protect, and ultimately distribute their wealth. And we do that by offering investment wealth management services. Thank you for taking time to check us out. Now, my clients are often referred to as cross-border clients. Why is that? Well, it's because they're either U.S. or Canadian residents who wish to invest in U.S. and or Canadian dollar denominated securities like stocks, bonds, and ETFs. Our process for advising our clients includes an in-depth discovery and diagnostic analysis of their wealth management goals and objectives. For many Americans, whether they're an employee or a business owner, relocating to Canada will open the door to a discussion of both several wealth management related topics. And there's also the intangibles, which include simply adjusting to day-to-day life in Canada. And for many employees or business owners, that will mean adjusting to Canadian business and work culture. On this episode of the Three Questions webcast series, we're going to continue our discussion on the differences between Canadian and business, work, and culture. Joining me once again is Lanie Denslow. She's the founder and principal of Wise Intercultural Training and Resources. Lanie is a leading author, popular speaker, and trusted advisor on how culture shapes business practices and business protocol around the world. She's also the author of Worldwise, What to Know Before You Go, and co-author of Working with Americans. And both of these publications are internationally recognized because of their practical insights regarding how culture influences business. Lanie has conducted seminars for global business leaders and organizations here in the United States, in China, Germany, Russia, and England. We'll have to get her up to Canada sometime real soon here. Hi, Lanie. Thanks again for joining us on the Three Questions webcast. Great to have you back.
Thank you, Wayne. It's a pleasure.
This one's going to be an interesting one because we're going to turn the tables here. On the last episode, we addressed the three questions Canadians should ask about America and Americans, to help them, build a more productive working relationships. This time around, like I said, the pressure is on here because they're going to turn the table around and now address the three questions Americans should ask about Canada and Canadians. So I'm putting you on the hot seat today because we're going to try to help Americans, build more productive and working relationships with Canada. So
I think we should switch.
Yeah, you want to I knew you were going to say this. I knew this was coming.
You're the Canadian. Okay. I'm going to talk about Canadians from my American perspective and things.
And then I'm going to correct you.
And you're going to correct me.
Okay.
Could not be more perfect.
Before we jump into our three questions, given your expertise here, I think it would be great if you could share with the folks listening and watching in today why it's so important for American businesses and their employees to take the time to develop skills in that area of business communication in the global environment where they're working with folks outside of the United States.
I think it is critically important because we know that business really is all about relationships. Whether you're talking about a new team, a new supplier, a consultant, it's all about people working together to achieve a common goal, create something new, build a factory, whatever it might be. And each of us have different ideas about how we should engage with each other, how to do business, what makes us feel respected. And we Americans, I think everybody in the world, but we're talking about we Americans today, need to understand each other's similarities and differences. And so whether it's talking about what's the role of the boss, how do you show respect, how do you build relationships, the more we know about what makes each of us comfortable and what we think the appropriate way to do it is, the better are our chances that we can actually engage and work together.
Well,
that's my rather long answer but the goal is always that we understand each other and we can find ways to collaborate and work together.
And not offend people.
That too.
And that too.
No I tell my clients I want them to avoid insulting people when they don't intend to, and worse yet, thinking they've been insulted when they haven't.
Well, on that note, and just going back that I now remember, or we now know that the first time we met was back in 2016, back in March of 2016. And so as I mentioned, the last webcast, it was Lanie who picked me up at the airport in San Jose, California. It was back in March of 2016 because I was supposed to attend a presentation, and it turned out that you were the speaker at that presentation. And the topic of that presentation was exactly that. You had a whole presentation on how not to offend people in business culture, whether it be Americans or people from other parts of the world, and you provided examples on things that Americans take for granted, on mannerisms and terminology and phraseology, and how for people in other parts of the world they may not take too kindly to some of those. And it was really an engaging presentation. I enjoyed every minute of it, and I'm glad that we've kept in touch ever since. And really, it's your ability to advise businesses on the fundamental concepts of intercultural communication that make you the perfect guest for this episode. Although I must admit, I am putting you on the bit of the hot seat here. This is going to be fun. So let's get right into it, Lanie. Let's address these 3 questions Americans should ask Canada about Canadians to help them and enable them to build more productive working relationships. And we're going to pretty much play off of a little bit of what we did the last time, but I'm going to start with, what are the key things that you believe Americans should know about Canada? Take it away.
All right, let's start out by talking about Canada, the country. So we share the longest border in the world with another country, with Canada. And I think those of us in the US think that crossing the border may not make much difference about anything. And yet we get there and find out it makes a difference in a lot of ways. But let's think for a minute about the ties. That Canada and the US are huge trading partners. I think that Canada was, in 2021, the largest trading partner for the US. We have
been that way for quite a long time.
Connections, deep roots of connections between the 2 countries, but they are 2 different countries, and we have 2 different forms of government, just as one basic difference. Canada has a governor general who is appointed by now King Charles of England, who is head of state. And then they have a prime minister, Mr. Trudeau, who is head of government. In the US, both those roles rest with the President of the United States. One small thing, but very important thing to know, is that the currency is different when you cross the border. It's a big thing. It's a everyday thing. It touches your personal life as well as your professional life. Canada has territories and provinces across the country, like we have states, but one thing we share is that there are regional differences across the country, just as there are in the US.
Yeah, we had mentioned that in the last webcast. You're absolutely right.
Right. And I think most people that I know recognize Vancouver and Toronto if you ask them to name 2 cities in Canada. But not many people will name Ottawa, which is actually the capital. So I think it's important in terms of respect and recognition about a country is to know where's the capital and to go visit it. It's a great city. Let's see. What are some other things that are important? Well, it would be important for a lot of Americans to understand that marijuana is actually legal, a legally controlled substance all across Canada. That's not true in the US. And I think that is something that's useful to understand in a business and a personal way. And I could talk about a few other things that are practical, but I think those
you hit some of the big ones. I got one for you.
Okay. And then I want to come back with something. So
okay, I got one to share with you, because you said you wanted my 2 cents worth on this.
Yes.
One of the unique things about Canada is that, and I may have this statistic not perfectly, but I'm pretty close. I would say about 90% of the Canadian population is resting within about 100 miles of the US border across the country. So the bulk of the Canadian population nudges right up against the US border in relative size of the country. If you look at the size of the country and where most of the population is, it's fairly tied close to the US border, right? From basically from British Columbia right across until I guess you get to Maine, which is edges up against New Brunswick.
That I didn't know, but that is interesting. I now see this narrow in my mind, a narrow ribbon of Canada right up against the US.
From a population perspective. And then another note, I could actually share this with you. There's a map out there that shows that 50% of the population, in terms of numbers, is basically in a very small area of the country, when relatively speaking,
Right.
for a bulk of it being in southern Ontario, which is Toronto has the largest cities. Of course, there are 6 million plus people in the greater Toronto area out of a population of around 40 million.
Whoa. Okay.
Which means that, Lanie, for you, the state of California and the country of Canada have very similar population bases.
That's true. I was thinking that LA, where I used to live, has 10 million people. So
it's the greater Los Angeles area where we are now.
That's right. So you are now one of those 10 or 11 million people.
Exactly right.
They are lucky to have you.
You're too kind.
I want to go back, step back and focus on Canada in a different way. And that is, there are two official languages, English and French. And the third language in Canada is Chinese. You don't have a big Spanish speaking population the way we do, but also you have Quebec, which is a distinct area where French is the official language. English is a second language. If you do business there, everything is in both English and French. And my understanding is that Quebec follows the French legal system rather than the English legal system, which is followed through the rest of Canada. So you have this part of your country that is separate and part all at the same time.
You got it. And there's another little anecdote we'll add to that, is that if you your children have to go to a French speaking school when you raise your kids there, there's it's French first, and makes it again a different part of the country. It makes Canada unique.
Right.
Adds to the flavor.
Yes. And Montreal and Quebec City are pretty fabulous places to visit.
You're telling me, two of my favorite cities. Nothing like summertime in Quebec City. And those will tell you also wintertime in Quebec City for the winter carnival. But I certainly enjoyed my time in Quebec City in the summers, that's for sure. Great job, Lanie.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you a pass on that one.
Okay, but can I add one more thing?
Yes, you can. Why not?
That immigration to Canada is much easier than it is to the United States.
To a certain degree, you can put that there, but I would. It's not as easy as you might. We actually have an episode on that we're going to talk about that. Actually, that's a part of one.
Okay, then I want to listen to that one, because
definitely I encourage you to. I would. That's a topic, as you know, usually comes up right around election time.
Right.
Every 4 years, a quarter of the population of America wants to immigrate to Canada.
That's true. And okay, so I know there's more that we want to get to.
So why don't we move on to our next question? So based on your opinion, what do you, because I know you do interact with business cultures all over the world. Based on your experience, what are some of the things that Canadian businesses wish Americans knew about Canadian business culture? If you can maybe give me two examples of where there would be more clarity appreciated.
I'll give you three. How's that?
Okay.
One is that Canadians are more subtle and less direct about their marketing. So I think if it was Australia, I would tell you, don't be a tall poppy. That Canadians wish Americans understood that our aggressive out there marketing is not necessarily the appropriate approach. Then in a practical way, what I heard from several people is, please understand that we have different time zones than you have. And so when you want to set up a meeting with someone in Canada, could you please really figure out what the time is where you are and what the time is where I am, and don't assume that they will be the same. And what was the third thing that I wanted to tell you? Let's think about that for a minute. People complain that Americans don't understand that Canadians have different holidays than we do. That Thanksgiving is in October in Canada, not in November. And there is such a thing as Canada Day and Victoria Day and Boxing Day, holidays that we don't have.
And Remembrance Day, which is sort of the same as Veterans Day, but that's a big one in Canada too, November 11th.
Yeah, I think people get frustrated that Americans don't take the possibility that because they want to have a conference a certain week, that's going to be perfect without checking to see if there's a national holiday to be considered.
I find one of the things I found different, and maybe this should have been on the previous episode, is Canadians more, I discovered in Canada, they take the Thanksgiving weekend in the United States is a much bigger deal than the time between Christmas and New Year's in Canada. I found in Canada that week things kind of shut down. There wasn't a lot of commerce taking place between basically, I'd say December 23rd and January 2nd. Above and beyond, essential services, businesses run, but many businesses run at half speed. Whereas basically the day after Christmas, if if Christmas falls on a Monday, then it's not surprising that, Tuesday or definitely Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, people are back to work again up full speed. That was an eye opener for me. But that's I guess I should have had that on our last episode, but I will throw it in there now.
Well, it's those things that can make it so difficult for a company to move from one country to another, or people to move from one country to the other, is it upsets the familiar rhythm that they're used to in their lives. So knowing before you make that transition can be super helpful. Business, can I add a couple other things about business?
Sure. Before we get on to question number 3, go ahead.
So I think it's important to understand that insurance is paid. There's government provided insurance in Canada.
You're talking about health insurance?
Health insurance.
Well, there's universal health care.
Universal health care. Okay.
It's not health insurance, it's universal health care. There you go.
And that there are actually mandated vacation times for everybody, which is two things that are significantly different than in the US.
Well done. You're catching on here.
Okay,
so I'm going to make this next one a little easier. So in terms of, what would you say are the 3, I guess we'll limit it to 3 day-to-day differences that might surprise Americans about Canada? What would you say they are, based on your knowledge? And I'll see how well you do and see if I have to add any to the list here.
Well, one of the things I always think about, I talked about this last time, is in day-to-day connecting to people, understanding about not just holidays and time, but what are the major sports. And I talked about before, when I first met you, you talked about hockey, which I barely know anything about. And I would have talked to you about American football, which is probably not high on your list of things.
Well, au contraire, I am a Rams season ticket holder.
Well, my goodness, I am very impressed. Who bad about the Rams?
Canadians, here we go. So, little education for my friend Lanie. Canadians, a lot of Canadians, and I know I got to be careful here, but a lot of Canadians follow the NFL and the NBA, and of course, Major League Baseball fairly closely. But I think hockey is still, I think, the number one sport. But for me, I followed the NFL since like 13 years old.
Well, I think that's just fabulous, actually. So,
yeah. And that's not unusual. I got family members that live and die on the NFL. And one in particular, I'm thinking of is a Minnesota Vikings fan who his entire garage is festooned in Vikings gear to the nth degree. So it's NFL is not a unknown sport in north of the U.S. border. That's for sure.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. One other thing that I think is important is Canadians as a whole generally have a much bigger world view and much more interest in the world at large than the average American. And I think would definitely inform conversations, how people think about traveling, all those day-to-day things that are part of getting to know each other and to engage, that it's easier to find international news, but the attitude is much more open to the world. So those are my three things for today.
And I'll put a financial services angle on this before we wrap up. When I moved, I would say in some ways, the U.S. financial services industry may be a little bit further ahead than Canada is. I know when I was back in Canada, the consensus was that America was about 5 years ahead in some ways. One of the things where I felt right from the get-go here when I moved to the United States is that Canadian investing strategies, I felt, and I exclude One Capital, by the way, who were global, are global investors. But I found American investing behavior tended to be a lot more myopic, a much more U.S. based.
Yes.
Whereas Canadians, just by virtue of the fact that Canada makes up like 2, maybe 3% of the world stock market capitalization. So we have to be, and we being Canadians, have to be globally diversified just to get exposure to the markets. So that would be one of the big differences I saw, was that Canadian investing I go back decades, it's been more globally focused. We're starting to see more of that in the U.S. now, but definitely that was an area where I would see a definite difference between America and Canada.
And it seems that would be consistent with having a broader, ongoing global view.
Yeah, but in a way, it's forced. We've covered a lot here over 2 episodes. This has been tremendous. So as I mentioned in the last episode, your contact information is going to be on the screen at all times. But just one more time, as far as people, I would imagine people are going to want to reach out to you, and knowing that you are an expert, you're available to be a speaker, a consultant. I can't imagine you won't be in demand. If someone wanted to get a hold of you, you mentioned the last time that texting or contacting the phone number that we're going to provide is probably the best way.
Yep, that, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Those are probably the best ways to get to me. And I am more than happy to connect with everybody who's listening to this podcast, because this has been outrageously fun.
All right. Well, Lanie, I want to thank you again. Lanie Denslow is the founder and principal of Wise Intercultural Training and Resources. As I mentioned earlier, she's a leading author, popular speaker, a trusted advisor on how culture shapes businesses and practices around the world. One last time, I want to thank you, Lanie, for joining us, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Great, Wayne, and thank you for inviting me. This has been absolutely delightful and educational for me too.
Thanks a lot, Lanie. Take care. I look forward to bringing you the 3 Questions webcasts, and I hope you find them educational and informative. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to our YouTube channel. And to receive notification of when our latest webcasts have been posted, please click on the notifications bell. Lastly, to schedule an online Zoom consultation with me to discuss your wealth management needs, please click on the link in the description box below, www.onecapital.com/meetwithwayne. Thank you and see you soon.